Rebecca Thornton was 31 years old in the summer of 1887 when she became the primary firewood supplier for Timber Creek, Oregon Territory, taking over the business her father had built before dying of lung disease the previous spring. People called her Becca, never Rebecca, Becca Thornton, the woman who cut wood like a man, who could fell a tree straighter than most loggers, who understood forest management better than men twice her age. She'd learned everything from her father, Thomas Thornton, who taught her the trade from age 12 when it became clear she had the strength, the mind, and the dedication for the work. She was unmarried by choice, had turned down 3 proposals over the years from men who wanted a wife, not a business partner, men who expected her to give up logging and become a proper homemaker. She'd refused all of them, chose independence over marriage, chose her father's business over conventional expectations for women. Taking over the firewood supply business meant responsibility for keeping 60 families warm through Oregon winters that brought rain for months straight, that turned everything damp, that made dry firewood the difference between comfort and misery, between health and sickness. And Becca noticed something during her first summer running the business, something her father had mentioned occasionally but never solved. A problem that seemed minor until you understood the consequences. Everyone in Timber Creek stored their firewood wrong, completely wrong, in ways that guaranteed the wood would be wet when they needed it most. Most families just stacked firewood against their house walls under roof overhangs. Some built simple lean-to covers. A few had small sheds with walls on 3 sides. All of these methods failed for the same reason. They didn't account for Oregon Territory rain that fell sideways in winter wind, that came from every direction, that penetrated any storage system that wasn't completely enclosed and properly ventilated. Wet firewood was more than an inconvenience. Wet wood produced smoke without heat, filled houses with toxic smoke that caused respiratory disease, made stoves burn inefficiently, wasting fuel and failing to maintain temperature. Children developed chronic coughs. Adults developed lung problems. Some died from sustained smoke exposure combined with cold. Her father had died from smoke-damaged lungs. Years of breathing wood smoke in poorly ventilated spaces. Years of burning wood that wasn't properly dry because storage methods were inadequate. Becca had watched him deteriorate slowly, coughing constantly, unable to breathe properly, dying at 58 from lungs that looked like he'd worked in coal mines. She decided to solve the problem for herself first, then show others how to build proper firewood storage. She designed a stone shelter specifically engineered for keeping wood dry in Oregon's relentless winter rain while maintaining airflow for seasoning. The design was specific: stone walls on all 4 sides, not 3, complete roof coverage with proper overhang. But critically, the walls wouldn't be solid. She'd build them with gaps. Horizontal gaps every 3 feet, running the full length of each wall. Gaps that would allow air to flow through constantly, preventing moisture accumulation while keeping direct rain off the wood. The floor would be raised, stone foundation with wooden slats 6 inches above ground level. Airflow from below, moisture couldn't rise from earth into the wood pile. The roof would have vents at the peak. Hot, moist air would escape upward. Cold, dry air would enter through the wall gaps. Continuous ventilation without rain penetration. She took the design to Martin Huxley, the town's master mason, and the man everyone consulted for stone construction. He looked at her drawings with the patient condescension men showed women with construction ideas. "Miss Thornton, you want to build a stone fort for firewood. This is excessive. Firewood storage doesn't require walls on all sides, doesn't need ventilation gaps. Just stack it under cover and it stays dry enough." Dry enough isn't dry. Dry enough means 20% moisture content. Proper dry wood is 12% or less. The difference is smoke production, heat output, and respiratory health. That's very technical, but practically speaking, People have stored firewood under simple shelters for generations. Your design is overbuilt, expensive, unnecessary for something as simple as keeping wood somewhat dry. My father died from smoke-damaged lungs because our wood was never properly dry. Everyone in this town is breathing smoke from wet wood every winter. Building a proper shelter isn't excessive. It's engineering for actual dryness, not hoping for dry enough. Huxley set down her drawings with finality. I won't build this. It's wasteful. Stone construction for a woodshed is ridiculous. You're letting emotion over your father's death cloud your practical judgment. Becca tried 2 other masons. Both refused. Both said variations of the same thing. Too expensive. Over-engineered. Unnecessary. Women getting emotional and overbuilding simple structures. She decided to build it herself. She had no masonry experience, but she understood stone from years of clearing it from logging sites, understood weight distribution and structural integrity, could learn mortar mixing and wall building from observation and trial. She started in July, working mornings before heading to the forest for logging work. She'd already cut and stacked the winter firewood supply for her customers using the knowledge her father had taught her. Selecting trees, felling them safely, bucking the logs into 16-inch rounds, splitting the rounds into pieces that would fit stoves, stacking them in customers' yards under whatever inadequate covering they'd provided. Now she needed to build the shelter that would keep her own supply properly dry and prove to the town what proper storage looked like. First, she laid the foundation. This wasn't simple ground-level stacking. This was engineered construction requiring precise work. She collected flat river stones from the creek 2 miles away, making trips with her logging cart. Needed hundreds of stones. Flat ones for stable foundation layers. Each stone had to be evaluated for size, shape, and stability. She mortared them into a raised rectangular base, mixing sand, lime, and water in proportions she'd learned by asking questions at the mason's yard while pretending to just be curious about stonework. The foundation had to be level, absolutely level. Any slope would create water pooling, would undermine the drainage system she'd designed. 20 feet long, 12 feet wide. The dimensions were calculated for her annual firewood needs, approximately 6 cords stored with proper air circulation spacing. The foundation rose 8 inches above ground level, creating enough elevation to prevent ground moisture rising into the structure while providing stable footing for the walls. Then came the walls. This was the complicated part that required learning masonry through observation and trial. Building solid stone walls was straightforward, just stack and mortar. Building stone walls with intentional gaps while maintaining structural integrity was engineering that most masons never attempted because it served no conventional purpose. She couldn't just stack randomly. Each course needed to maintain horizontal gaps at specific intervals while keeping the walls strong enough to support roof weight and resist Oregon wind. The bottom 3 feet had to be completely solid, providing structural foundation and preventing low-level rain penetration. Then a 4-inch horizontal gap running the full 20-foot length of the wall. Then 3 more feet of solid stone. Then another 4-inch gap. Pattern repeated to a height of 8 feet total. The gaps had to align perfectly on all 4 walls. Had to be exactly 4 inches, wide enough for substantial airflow, but narrow enough that wind-driven rain wouldn't penetrate horizontally. Had to be continuous, not broken by vertical supports that would interrupt air movement. The work was physically demanding. Each stone had to be lifted, positioned, mortared, leveled. A full day of work might complete 3 feet of wall. At that rate, finishing 4 walls would take weeks of morning labor before her logging shifts. The town noticed within days. Noticed Becca Thornton building a massive stone structure behind her cabin. Noticed she was clearly constructing something far more elaborate than firewood storage required. The mockery started at the general store. Sarah Patterson, wife of the mill owner, organized what she called a concerned discussion, but was actually public criticism. "Becca, dear, people are worried about you. You're building what looks like a stone fortress for firewood. It's excessive, concerning, the kind of project that suggests you're not coping well with your father's death. Maybe you should consider lighter work, something more suitable for a woman your age who should be thinking about marriage, not masonry. I'm building proper firewood storage, engineered to keep wood at 12% moisture content. Everyone in this town is burning wet wood and damaging their lungs. This isn't grief. This is solving a problem that killed my father and is harming others. Firewood just needs to be kept somewhat dry. What you're building is obsessive. Frankly, it's making people uncomfortable. A woman doing heavy construction, building something so elaborate for such a simple purpose. It raises questions about your stability." The implication was clear. If Becca continued this strange behavior, if she kept building her excessive stone shelter, if she persisted in acting more like a man than a proper woman, the community might need to intervene, might need to question her capability to run a business, might need to suggest she accept one of those marriage proposals and let a man handle the firewood supply. Becca kept building. By September, the 4 walls were complete. Stone structures 8 feet high with ventilation gaps creating horizontal stripes around all sides. It looked bizarre, like a regular stone building someone had removed horizontal slices from, like a fortress with built-in weaknesses. The roof was next. She built a timber frame with steep pitch for rain runoff, covered it with overlapping cedar shakes, extended the overhang 2 feet past the walls on all sides. Rain would run off the roof and fall clear of the walls. Wouldn't penetrate the ventilation gaps, wouldn't reach the wood stacked inside. At the roof peak, she installed vents, simple openings with weather covers that kept rain out but let hot air escape. The shelter would breathe. Air would enter through the wall gaps, flow through the stacked wood, rise with heat and moisture, and exit through the peak vents. Continuous ventilation, continuous drying. She installed the floor last. Wooden slats with gaps between them, raised 6 inches above the stone foundation. Air could flow beneath the woodpile. Moisture couldn't rise from ground level. The entire structure was designed for airflow from every direction while protecting from direct rain. The shelter was finished in October, just in time. She began transferring her firewood supply inside, stacking it carefully with gaps between rows for air circulation. The wood she'd cut in spring and early summer, already partially seasoned, would finish drying in this perfect environment. The town's mockery intensified now that the structure was complete. The Thornton Fortress, they called it. The stone monument to a woman's excessive response to a simple problem. Evidence that Becca couldn't think rationally, that emotion was driving her to waste resources on over-engineered solutions. Martin Huxley made his criticism public at the October town meeting. "Becca Thornton has built a stone fortress to store firewood. It's the most excessive construction I've seen in 40 years of masonry. A simple lean-to shelter costs $5. She spent maybe $100 on materials and months of labor on a structure that provides no additional benefit. This is what happens when women try to do engineering without proper training or male guidance." People laughed, agreed, shook their heads at the foolish woman who'd wasted time and money building something elaborate when simple would suffice. Becca said nothing, didn't defend herself, didn't argue, let them laugh. She knew what was coming, knew that Oregon winter would prove who understood firewood storage and who just assumed traditional methods worked adequately. November brought the rain, Oregon Territory rain that fell continuously for days, that came horizontally in wind, that found every gap and weakness in structures built to resist it. Rain that turned the world wet and kept it wet for months. Everyone's firewood got wet. Families who'd stacked against house walls found rain soaking their supply from wind-driven precipitation. Those with lean-to shelters discovered that covering 3 sides meant the 4th side absorbed weather from every storm that came from that direction. Those with simple roofed enclosures learned that without ventilation, moisture accumulated from ground vapor and couldn't escape. By late November, most families were burning wood with 25 to 30% moisture content. The wood barely burned, produced tremendous smoke, filled houses with toxic haze that made eyes water, made breathing difficult, made children cough constantly. The Henderson family's youngest daughter developed severe respiratory distress. Dr. Palmer examined her and made his diagnosis clear. Smoke inhalation damage. Her lungs are inflamed from breathing wood smoke continuously. Your firewood is too wet. It's producing smoke instead of heat. This house is making your children sick. But we covered the wood, Mrs. Henderson protested. We built a shelter with a roof. Covered isn't dry, your wood is wet. Every family in this town is burning wet wood. I'm seeing respiratory cases weekly, chronic coughs, lung inflammation. Some of this will cause permanent damage if it continues all winter. The problem was widespread. Wet wood meant houses couldn't maintain temperature despite burning continuously, meant smoke-filling living spaces, meant fuel consumption tripled because wet wood produced minimal heat, meant families were suffering despite having adequate firewood supplies. Becca's stone shelter was performing exactly as designed. The continuous airflow kept her wood at 12% moisture content. The complete enclosure protected from rain. The raised floor prevented ground moisture. The peak vents released humid air. Her firewood was dry, truly dry, properly seasoned. When she burned it in her stove, it caught immediately, burned hot and clean, produced minimal smoke, heated her cabin efficiently. She used maybe 1/3 the wood her neighbors consumed to maintain the same temperature. Her house had no smoke accumulation, no respiratory irritation, just clean heat from dry fuel. People noticed. Hard not to notice that Becca Thornton's chimney produced clean smoke, while everyone else's produced thick grey haze that indicated incomplete combustion from wet wood. December brought the crisis that proved everything. Not gradually, not with warning. The storm system arrived December 5th and settled over Western Oregon territory like it planned to stay forever. A 3-week period of continuous rain and cold that tested every assumption about adequate preparation. The rain fell continuously, not heavy downpours that came and went, steady, relentless precipitation that accumulated slowly but never stopped, half an inch daily, every day, for 21 consecutive days. The kind of rain that soaked everything, that found every weakness in structures, that made dry storage impossible with inadequate systems. Temperature dropped to 30 degrees and stayed there. Cold enough that houses needed continuous heating. Warm enough that rain fell instead of snow, the worst possible combination. Wet and cold. Conditions that made burning wet firewood catastrophic because families needed heat desperately, but their fuel couldn't provide it. The town was suffering by day 3, every family burning through wood supplies at rates they hadn't anticipated, wood that wouldn't catch easily, wood that smoldered and smoked instead of burning hot and clean, wood that consumed 3 times normal quantity to produce half normal heat. The Henderson family situation was typical. Mr. Henderson was feeding their stove every hour, burning wood continuously, watching smoke fill the house despite the chimney drawing reasonably well. The problem wasn't the stove or chimney. The problem was fuel with 30% moisture content that couldn't burn properly no matter how much you used. Their children developed the cough on day 5, all 3 of them, the characteristic dry cough that indicated irritated lungs. By day 7, the youngest daughter, Emma, age 4, was having difficulty breathing. Her lungs were inflamed from sustained smoke exposure. Dr. Palmer examined her and delivered the diagnosis that terrified every parent in town. Smoke inhalation damage. Her airways are inflamed. Her lungs are struggling. This is from breathing wood smoke continuously. Your firewood is too wet. It's producing toxic smoke instead of heat. If this continues, she could develop permanent lung damage. Some children don't recover from this kind of sustained exposure. Martin Huxley came to Becca's cabin on day 12 of the continuous rain, not to check on her, to understand how she was managing when everyone else was failing. She opened the door. Clean air rolled out. Her cabin smelled like home, not like smoke. Huxley stood there, exhausted from tending fires all night, from breathing smoke continuously, from watching his own children develop the persistent cough, and he couldn't speak for a moment. "Your house doesn't smell like smoke," he finally said. "Everyone's house smells like constant fire. Yours smells normal." "How?" "Dry firewood. 12% moisture content, burns clean, produces heat, not smoke. The stone shelter works exactly as I designed it to work." "Can I see it? The shelter?" She took him to the stone structure behind her cabin, opened the door. Huxley stepped inside and understood immediately. The wood was dry, actually dry. He could feel the difference, could see how the ventilation gaps created airflow, could understand how the complete enclosure protected from rain while the circulation prevented moisture accumulation. "This isn't excessive," he said quietly. "This is correct. Everything else in town is inadequate. We've all been storing firewood wrong for generations. You built the only storage system that actually works." Word spread faster than the rain fell. Becca Thornton's stone shelter kept her firewood dry. Actually dry. Not damp but usable. Not wet, but it'll burn eventually. Truly, properly. 12% moisture content dry. The excessive design everyone had mocked was the only proper solution in the entire town. The fortress everyone had laughed at was saving her from the smoke sickness affecting every other family. People came to see the shelter starting on day 13 of the continuous rain. Not to mock anymore, to understand, to learn, to figure out if they could build something similar before their own children developed permanent lung damage. Becca showed them everything, opened the shelter door and let them step inside, let them feel the dry wood, let them understand the difference between wood stored under a simple lean-to shelter and wood stored in an engineered environment designed for continuous ventilation. The contrast was dramatic. Wood from conventional storage felt damp to the touch, had that characteristic heavy feeling of absorbed moisture, smelled musty, left your hands feeling slightly wet. Becca's wood felt light, dry, clean, smelled like fresh-cut timber, not like mold and damp. She explained the design principles to anyone who asked, showed them how the horizontal gaps created cross-ventilation at multiple heights, how the raised floor prevented ground moisture from rising into the woodpile, how the peak vents allowed humid air to escape while the complete walls prevented rain penetration. "It's not complicated," she told them. "It's just understanding that air needs to move through constantly while rain needs to be kept out completely. Most storage systems do one or the other. This does both. That's why it works when everything else fails." Thomas Brennan was the first to start building. He had 4 children, all developing respiratory problems from smoke exposure. He couldn't afford to hire a mason, couldn't wait until spring to fix his storage problem. He needed dry wood now, or his family would suffer all winter. Becca helped him, spent her afternoons after logging shifts teaching him stone selection, mortar mixing, wall building, showed him how to maintain the horizontal gaps while keeping structural strength, lent him tools, corrected his mistakes patiently. Within 3 weeks, the Brennan family had a functional stone shelter built using her principles. Their firewood began drying immediately. The ventilation worked. The protection worked. Within 2 weeks, they were burning wood at 18% moisture. Not perfect, but vastly better than the 30% everyone else was struggling with. The smoke in their house diminished. The children's coughs began improving. The difference was undeniable. The Henderson girl recovered once her family started buying truly dry firewood from Becca's supply. Dr. Palmer wrote a letter to the Territorial Health Board recommending proper firewood storage regulations based on Becca Thornton's design. The chronic cough epidemic diminished as families either built better storage or bought properly seasoned wood from Becca's dry supply. By spring, 12 families had built stone firewood shelters using Becca's ventilated wall design. Not exact copies. Some modified the dimensions for their specific needs, some used different roofing materials, some adjusted the gap spacing based on their local wind patterns. But all incorporated her core principles: complete enclosure, continuous ventilation, raised floors, peak venting. The following winter, 1888 to 89, was the proof of sustained success. Those families with proper storage burned wood efficiently. Their houses stayed warm with minimal smoke. Their children remained healthy. The families still using conventional storage suffered the same problems as the previous year: wet wood, smoke accumulation, respiratory illness. The difference was stark and undeniable. By 1890, proper firewood storage became standard practice in Timber Creek. New families moving to town were told immediately, build a ventilated stone shelter or your winter will be miserable. The practice spread to neighboring communities as people visited relatives, saw the shelters, understood the benefits, and replicated the design in their own towns. Dr. Palmer documented the health impact in a report to the Territorial Medical Board. Respiratory illness in Timber Creek dropped 70% after families adopted proper firewood storage. Chronic coughs in children nearly disappeared. Adult lung disease decreased significantly. The correlation between dry firewood and respiratory health was clear and measurable. The report credited Rebecca Thornton by name. Miss Thornton's engineering solution to firewood moisture management has achieved public health outcomes superior to any medical intervention available. Proper storage eliminates the source of smoke-related illness rather than attempting to treat symptoms after exposure. This approach should be adopted territory-wide. Within 5 years, ventilated stone woodsheds were common across Western Oregon Territory. Within 10 years, the design appeared in agricultural extension publications. Within 20 years, it was considered standard practice for anyone serious about efficient heating and family health. Becca never married, ran her father's firewood business for 30 more years. Built a reputation not just as a logger, but as an engineer who understood moisture management, ventilation dynamics, and respiratory health. When the University of Oregon started offering forestry programs in the early 1900s, they invited her to lecture on proper wood seasoning and storage. She died in 1921 at age 65. Her obituary mentioned her logging career, her business success, but focused primarily on her contribution to public health through proper firewood storage design. The stone shelter she built in 1887 still existed, still functional, still demonstrating the principles she'd proven correct. The historical marker erected in 1975 reads, Rebecca Thornton, 1856 to 1921, professional logger and engineer who designed ventilated stone firewood storage system in 1887. Design eliminated smoke-related respiratory illness in Timber Creek and influenced firewood storage practices across Oregon Territory. Proved that proper engineering serves public health and that expertise matters more than gender. But the story people tell is simpler and more powerful. About the woman who built a stone fortress for firewood while everyone laughed, who understood that dry enough isn't dry, who knew that smoke sickness came from wet wood, not from bad luck, who built something everyone said was excessive because she understood the difference between adequate and correct. They tell the story to remind people that mockery often targets innovation, that what looks excessive to those who don't understand the problem is exactly right to those who do. That sometimes building something elaborate for a simple purpose means you're the only one who truly understands that the purpose isn't simple at all. And that sometimes the woman everyone dismisses as emotional and impractical is the only one thinking clearly about cause and effect, about engineering solutions, about building systems that actually work, instead of systems that just look adequate until winter proves otherwise. The shelter still stands. The gaps in the stone walls still create ventilation. The design still works exactly as Becca calculated it would in 1887. And every winter, when Oregon rain falls sideways and firewood either stays dry or doesn't, people remember the woman who built a fortress for wood and saved a town from smoke.